Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. So, welcome everyone. Of course, it is still Women's History Month here, and it's March 2025. But on April 15th, 2025, a new novel comes out. It's called Saving Vincent, and it's by Joan Fernandez. And I encourage you to get it, pre order it. It is published through She Writes Press, who we love. And it's already been recognized by the American Writing Awards for winning their 2024 Art Award. So check out JoanFernandezAuthor.com. So welcome, Joan. How are you?
Thank you, Lisa. I am doing great. I'm so appreciative of being here and being able to talk to other women's history fiction fans.
Yes, I love what's women's history fiction, but it is based on a true story, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, this is the story of Jo Van Gogh, who is, she was married to Vincent van Gogh's husband, Theo. Many people know about him. He was Vincent's emotional and financial lifeline, and Jo got to know Vincent through her husband.
So Jo Van Gogh, do you know that's quite a name. Like, come on, as you write that down, Jo Van Gogh. Didn't you ever giggle about the name? I
I,
mean,
I did. I had a lot of fun with it. Yes.
yeah. Well, before we get into the story of her, because she really changed the course of, Van Gogh's life, because he was essentially, when we talk about the starving artist, was the like iconic starving artist, Vincent van Gogh. And she changed a lot of that, but not while they were alive, or he was alive, right?
Right. Well, the story, I mean, the true story is that uh, when Vincent died, his brother Theo inherited all of his artwork. Theo died just 6 months after Vincent. And so it was
Wow.
Jo and their 1-year-old baby who then, by law, inherited all of those artworks. But like you said, we all know that I think it's kind of general. People know that Vincent did not sell anything in his lifetime. Well, Theo hadn't been able to do that either. So it was Jo who basically saved Vincent from obscurity because it took her 15 years, but she's the one that promoted Vincent's work and gradually was able to build a following that enabled him to finally be acknowledged as a great artist.
Wow, wow. So I mean, that's amazing. And for him also to not be, hugely successful and still be an artist, and really do his craft is amazing too. The
It
love of
is,
art, you
it
know?
is, and the thing is, I think at that time that he was doing his art, Paris was this huge epicenter for artists. So think Silicon Valley and app developers. I mean, or the gold
Hmm.
rush. I mean, young people all across Europe, particularly men, were flooding into Paris to try to make their mark. So it was very hard for Vincent to stand out. I mean, he was just anonymous. And then add to that the fact that he had mental health issues and
Hmm.
that his work was really a little bit rebellious. It didn't fit into an easy category. It was easy for people just to set him aside, and only a few individuals, a few art critics recognized him. But as far as art dealers went who were trying to sell, they were very selective and they were sort of going for mainstream. And so they were completely overlooking Vincent.
Okay, but most of the art dealers and sellers, right, are going to
Yes.
be men, not
Yes.
women.
Yes, not women at all. Women were not welcome in that commercial trade.
Wow. So what happens to Joe? Here she is, a mom, a toddler, and then says, "No, I'm going to work with this." Or, other women wouldn't have that opportunity, but may not even maybe shunned from going, "Hey, I'm going to represent this artwork."
Yes, it was really actually, Lisa, that's a big story question that I struggled with, which was why was Jo so certain that Vincent's work was valuable when everyone else said it was not? Like, what gave her the
Hmm.
confidence? And so, what I came down to was a couple of things. She had a really deep background in music. Her dad was an industrialist. he was a workaholic, but the one luxury that he had, the one love he had was around music. So he bought all of his kids musical instruments, gave them lessons.
Mm.
They did salons in their these concerts in their home as she was
Mm.
growing up. One biographer said that Jo had the bachelor's degree equivalent in music with all of the
Oh,
lessons and
wow.
exposure she had. So if you think about music, it's one in which you interpret it as an expression. It's not, it's something that's ethereal that that you're inspired by. So there's that sort of sensibility that enabled Jo to look at art with a little bit more of that dimension. And then secondly, the other thing I found out, Lisa, was when I was doing my research, I read 100 letters that Jo and Theo wrote to each other when they were engaged. Jo was in Amsterdam, Theo was in Paris. And
Okay.
you know how in letters you can kind of be more vulnerable because you're not
Hmm.
looking at the person. And well, they share all of these tender questions, desires for the future. But among them, among those things, Jo was asking Theo, how do you look at art? What does art look like? How do you judge it?
Wow.
How do I know? And then, so he's answering these wonderful things like you have to just set conventional training aside. You have to look at it, you have to look beyond the paint.
Mm.
And then when they were married, because Theo had written so much about how he yearned for a partnership of equals, someone who would share the burdens of being an art dealer, I imagined not only them continuing their conversations, but also Vincent was mailing all of these rolled canvases constantly up to Paris. I imagined Jo being there when Theo opened them up and them talking about the art. So in the beginning of my book, I take that learning, I call it an apprenticeship.
Hmm.
She was able to respond when people said, well, we need to put a different colored frame on these paintings. She would recall, no, actually Theo said white would be better. So
Hmm.
she wasn't completely ignorant. She knew something about Vincent's art.
Hmm.
And so when she felt as though over time the art dealers and the art critics were ignoring Vincent, she stepped in. And
Wow.
also for all of those who are parents who are listening to this, it's because her son's inheritance was at stake. Otherwise,
Oh.
he was inheriting nothing from his father, and he was only a year old when Theo died. And so
Mm.
Jo had this sense of wanting her son to know something of his father, and I think we can all relate to that.
And her and his uncle,
Yeah.
because and it's funny because there's that side going, well, maybe she had a little thing for Vincent, too. Well, come on, but I think there's this obvious collaboration, and who says a woman wouldn't want to continue that legacy? It's like continuing her husband and brother-in-law's legacy
Right,
for
exactly.
them and her son.
Yes, exactly. She had this sense of he was misunderstood. And in fact, she was ridiculed for vouching for Vincent. She was called fanatical. She's too sentimental. She's too frantic. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And these are from art critics that did not agree that Vincent was anyone special. They said his work was too rushed, it was unfinished, it was rebellious. And it's because he was breaking rules. He was
Hmm.
breaking conventional rules. And
Yeah.
so she was attacked for that. But I think her motivation was coming from the heart.
Mm. And when you do that, you're a little stronger. Now,
I think, yeah, and
yeah,
you have conviction because it's coming from more than intellect. It's coming from a feeling.
a passion. And
Yeah.
also, the fact that they were writing to each other, her and her husband Theo, writing to each other and having that kind of conversation, that was part of their foundation of a relationship, which is pretty amazing. It's like, so he was looking at her as a smart woman too.
He was respecting her opinions. He was asking for them, and he trusted her enough to be able to share those with him. Theo Van Gogh was a real forward thinker. He saw the value of modern art before the rest of the industry. His gallery was in Montmartre, which today is kind of central Paris, but at the time it was on the outskirts. And he collected for himself Camille Pissarro, Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, statues by Rodin. I mean, Paul Gauguin. He really believed in this art, but he was facing tremendous pressure from the partners of the gallery he worked for to turn over art. They're saying you're not making enough sales. And so he was really an
Oh, yeah.
outlier when it came to appreciating his brother, but also all the impressionists at that time.
Yeah, because it's so interesting how art movements come. Like now we're doing impressionism, now we're doing this, now we're doing that, and it's like everybody get to school and do it this way. And then somebody goes, yeah, and
It's
that's the beauty of art. Like if you have to color within the lines exactly the way everybody says, then we start to become robots and not artists. So,
I agree.
yeah.
And I think artists in many way are uncanny in really being on the edge of current times and painting or playing music or doing whatever their creative expression is that's reflection of exactly what's happening in that moment. And I think many people are like a beat behind.
hmm Well, the arts are everything to me. The
Mm,
arts and nature. That's got to, that's my church,
yeah.
But the arts tell the truth
Yes.
over
Yeah.
time. It's like, and artists that come out and say, no, I'm going to stand up for Vincent, she's doing that in her way. She is an art lover. She understands something there and standing her ground. So I love this. And you wrote it as a fiction instead of, hey, let me write about her. I know there's another biography out by her about her, but you chose to do the fiction side. So that way you kind of gives you that liberty to give her character, right?
Yes, because I felt as though by reading those letters as well as other works that
Mm,
I knew where she was coming from. So for example, she when she was a young girl, she was really worried about how risky and dangerous the work was on the piers around Amsterdam. It was a major portal city, and her
mhm,
dad, what his work as an industrialist was associated with that. So
mm,
she wrote in her diary saying to her father, this, I'm not quoting her, but
mm.
the sentiment was, this is not right. These people are working in dangerous situations. And he was like, that's the way the world works, right? Well, then fast forward then when I was reading in doing my research, how she innovated in terms of using Vincent's art as a way to support social justice, it made sense to me because she had those
Oh, wow.
original thoughts when she was a young girl.
Mm.
So the one example is she collaborated with a little museum and said, "Hey, instead of giving me the entrance fees, let's donate those funds to another fund that's for poor relief." And so she did that periodically throughout her promotion of Vincent's
Wow.
work. And
Wow.
she knew that Vincent would have agreed with that because he considered himself more of a laborer than
Mm.
he used to be derogatory and call business people money men. They're only about the money, which there's an element of truth about that.
Well,
So
you kind of come from that industry from well, the money side of, the corporate money side. So this is interesting for you. This story has got to be like fascinating to see all sides, you
this is
know,
true. This is true, Lisa. So I
but you're
having
not a man, but
I'm not a man, but I am a survivor of being in male-dominated industries and
yeah.
making my way. So that's another thing. As I was doing the research, I felt like I was sometimes reading between the lines about what she had to do in order to move forward. So, for example, she had this idea of wanting to publish excerpts of Vincent's letters, which was turned out to be brilliant, but she had to work through another artist who would then get introduced to an editor of the art newspaper Le Mercure in Paris. And so that sort of natural negotiation, I remember doing that in my own career of, all right, I need to have this decision made. Who can I work through as an ally in order to get this done? I mean,
Mm,
it felt very familiar to me the way she had to kind of work in this totally male-dominated space that did not trust her, did not think she was smart enough, definitely felt like she did not belong, and so there was some suspicion there until she started to make sales because
Mm,
everybody respects money making. And she was
it's
it
true.
took her a while. It took her a number of years to really get that going, but that always drove respect.
And you have to learn how to sell,
Yes.
and people don't like salespeople, but I think the world doesn't run without us. I've done sales all through my life, and it's a respectful thing, and people just have this negative connotation to it. But you wouldn't have cars without salespeople. You wouldn't have food. You wouldn't have, a salesperson fills a need.
Yes,
You just
absolutely.
may not know you have that need
No, but
sometimes.
once you're introduced, well, and that was one of her fundamental strategies was just generating awareness. And sometimes that awareness would be criticism. Like people
Right.
are really art dealers who own these galleries. Some of them, I saw some letters where they didn't make any sales, but they loved the debate. A debate would happen when they were showing
That's
Vincent's work,
awesome.
and they loved that engagement. So there are some people that understand awareness creates curiosity, and that's half
And
the
some
battle.
eccentric is going to, with a lot of money, is going to turn around and go, I'm buying it just because of
Exactly.
that.
Yes,
Right. That's why
yes.
they say, bad PR is good PR. Sorry, 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 books forward. They're not bad, they're good. But you know what I mean? It's really true, because if it's giving some attention, it gets out there and it's making people think.
Hmm.
And sometimes, if there's bad press, some people will stand up for the person that's being attacked and say,
Hmm.
whoa, whoa, which is
Hmm.
better than the person standing up for themselves. They can just ignore it. And if they're dead, well, then, you're debating over someone's, passing, their body basically. But
Yes,
art lives on forever if it's not thrown aside. But it could have all gone away if it
yes,
wasn't for her. She could have just went, all right, just keep it in a storage shed somewhere. Not that they had storage sheds then, but you know what I mean. And
yes.
just, she could have just not done it.
Yes.
Mm,
Yes. So she could have done what society expected of her. She could have moved back to her father's, who was living in Amsterdam from Paris, which is where
mm-hmm.
she had lived with Theo. And she could have left the artwork behind, as you said, with there are some artist friends that said, don't worry, we'll take care of everything.
Of course.
She could have moved back home and just said, "Let's just discard the paintings."
Mm,
They didn't sell. She would just like take her hands off of them. But instead, I like to say she chose door number three, which didn't
yeah.
exist at the time. She moved instead of to her father. She did go back to the Netherlands, but she went to a small town where she opened up a boarding house so that she could have an income for her son, and she took the paintings with her, and that there was some outcry over that because her Theo and Vincent's buddies were saying, are you crazy? Paris is where it's at. But instead she did leave some paintings there that were
Mm-hmm.
already at some galleries, but she took the treasure trove that she had in their apartment, moved them into the attic of her boarding house, and that's what she started out with in terms of writing letters.
Out of a boarding house.
Hmm. And
Wow.
I think any of us who are working parents with little children totally get the exhaustion, the details, all of
It's
it.
like, let me go to a gallery, but I've got like barf on my shoulder.
I know. So she just had a lot going on. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So, with this between being Paris and also, going Amsterdam, right? So the two different languages. For you doing the research, what was that like?
I
And what was the communication like for everyone back then? Did they understand each other's languages, or did they speak English?
it depended on your economic class. So
Hmm.
because Joe was in the middle class and a rising middle class, because her father continued to do well, she spoke, in addition to Dutch, she spoke French and English
Wow.
and had maybe a smattering of German.
Wow.
And so when she was working with Vincent's letters, there were times when she had to translate his Dutch letters into French or into English.
Mhm.
So she was very comfortable with languages. And I think that people who were in business or in a higher economic class, they spoke a couple of different languages. Now, Vincent himself experienced, when he moved to the south of France, as an example, he moved to Arles, which is where he painted sunflowers and the bedroom, many things, and then also ended up going to an asylum for a year because he had mental health issues there. Well, when he was in Arles, I noticed in his letters that he was really lonely. He was extremely lonely. And while he was there, a couple of the portraits that he painted intrigued me. He painted a soldier, a postman, a policeman, the postman's family. And
Wow. Uniform.
it struck me, Lisa, when it comes to languages, that Vincent spoke Parisian French, and because all of those portrait people would have spoken government, work for the government, so they would have spoken Parisian French. Vincent could speak with them, but he could not talk to the village people, the townspeople who were there in Arles, because they spoke a local Occitan dialect. And I
Okay.
learned this just through research, and it
Wow.
gave double meaning to his letters when he said how, because he couldn't speak with anyone. And then on why he was so lonely. And then after he had his mental health episode where he cut off his ear,
Mm.
he went into the hospital. And when he came out, the townspeople of Arles had signed a petition to not allow him to come back.
Wow.
And in part, it was because he was this slovenly guy who would shuffle out into the countryside every day with his canvas and his paint box and all this stuff. He would come back late at night. He was just like an odd, weird character. He didn't bathe, he smelled, his teeth were bad. I mean, all this stuff. And people just were really suspicious of him, also because they could not talk with him.
Mm. And mental, you know, health. I mean, that was not a good thing back then either. I mean, it's just now that we can even talk about it. When you think about that,
Yes.
the people are, the fear of mental health is real. People were scared probably of him.
Yes, that's a wonderful insight because I feel like it's just been in recent years that it's been a little bit more normalized that we can talk
Yeah.
about it.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting, huh? Because you got to think what's going on in an artist's head, and being an artist is such a solitary art.
Hmm.
Like a writer, it's solitary, even though
Hmm.
you've got all these characters, but it's not like, being in a band, then you've got everyone there, and sometimes you want it to be solitary. Just saying. I've been there, done that, but yeah, finding this story, because have you found people like me who just like, I didn't know that she existed, that Joe Van Gogh was there? I mean, have you found a lot of people like me going, I don't know, I didn't know that?
Yes, the vast majority. And so it just makes me so happy if we can get Joe's
Mm,
story out there because
yeah.
it's when at one point, my husband and I did a little research trip. This is in 2019, just before the pandemic. And we were in
Good
Paris.
timing. Yeah.
I know. Well, we booked a tour with this group called locals.com, which meant
Mhm.
people volunteer and they'll do little local people will do trips with you. So I had selected a young woman who was had a fine arts degree, and I thought this would be great. And so she took us. I wanted to do a walking tour of where Joe lived, and then all the different places I know she would have been walking
Mhm.
to. So I get a sense of
Her-
distance and things like
Yeah,
that.
her day. Yeah.
Well, Lisa, we go to the address where Joe and Theo lived in this apartment building. They're up on
Wow.
the third floor. And I'm looking up there, and there's a little plaque next to one of the windows. And the plaque says, Here lived Theo Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh's brother, from 1889 to 1891. And I'm thinking, well, what about Joe? Like,
Yeah,
where's her name?
he wouldn't have been famous without her.
Right. So that sort of omission I found everywhere. I don't know why she's been erased from history, why she would not be acknowledged. And if anything, people assume that it was Theo who did it. And I think
Wow. Yeah, because he was in that industry.
he was
Yeah.
in the industry, and many people know he's the one that Vincent was conversing with through all those letters, and that Theo was an enormous help to him. And so it would stand to reason that people would make that assumption. But there's still no excuse for
Mm.
not having Joe acknowledged.
So this is so fascinating when you think about all of, just I mean, in him passing away so early, Theo as well, right? Um, in writing this and getting their letters, I mean, how did you get your hand? I mean, there's the letters from Vincent and Theo, but Theo and his wife, that had to have been a little bit more difficult to get, right? Than the ones that have Vincent or no.
Well, happily, the ones between Theo and his wife were in a book that had been, it was out of print, but I was still able to find it. And then the
Wow.
letters that, there's 900 letters that Vincent wrote either to Theo and just a handful of other people. And the Van Gogh Museum has published those. And so one year
Wow.
for Christmas, my husband gave me that. It was this 6 volumes of big, big, big books with drawings and all sorts of things in them. But that is what,
Wow.
the reason I chose to read them, Lisa, is because Joe only met Vincent 3 times herself.
Wow.
But I knew that she had read those letters. She did it after Theo was gone, and she found them in Theo's desk, and she started to read them. They were all just jammed in there. He was like a, pack rat. So
Mhm.
she gradually put them in chronological order. She would pencil in the date and the location that she was guessing it would be.
Wow.
She organizes this whole thing and reads all these letters. And I have this as an important kind of little piece in the book on how, to me, that was her turning point from I'm going to promote Vincent's work because I believe in my dear husband, whom I adored, to now I'm going to promote Vincent's artwork because I believe in Vincent myself, right?
Yeah.
He was converted through reading those letters. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to read these letters because that's the way that Joe got to know Vincent. And I do feel like I know him, Lisa, and I know it's insane because
Yeah.
he's been he on March 30th, it will be his 172nd birthday. And when I see Van Goghs in art museums, because now I'm kind of like it's like I'm on a safari.
Yeah.
I travel to try to see. I always feel like I'm on a first name basis with him, which is
It's like, hey,
ridiculous.
Vincent. Yeah. So of
Hey,
course you did the big immersion thing, that big experience.
I did. I did.
Yeah.
Actually, there were 3 different shows traveling around the United States at one point, and I managed to get to all 3 kind of by accident, but I did see 3 different
Kind of.
interpretations. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's I mean, and how did you find out about Joe?
I found out about Joe on a girlfriend trip to Amsterdam in 2016. So Lisa,
Well, this could
full,
be a party.
yeah, I'm like full on into my corporate career, as are they, and we think, okay, we got to get away from the kids' soccer games and we're gonna do a long weekend. We're gonna pick a city that's gonna be like a direct flight, New York,
Oh boy.
wherever. We pick Amsterdam. And the advantage of I love my husband. The advantage of traveling without him is that I'm not worried about how he's doing. I'm just there with my girlfriends, and so we have plenty of space for each other to do what we want. So I told the girls, okay, my choice is going to be I want to go to the Van Gogh Museum. We all got tickets. Then we did it on our own. I got one of those audio tours where I really want to get the full experience.
Mm.
Well, Lisa, what happens is that, and I've reached the end of that tour, and I am emotionally full of Vincent, like almost tears in my eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy was just so,
Oh,
so passionate. Well, it's while I'm there in that state that I see this little board of a family tree for Vincent. So I go over there. There's these little black and white postage stamp photos, and there's a picture of his father and his mother. And I'm looking at his dad. His dad just didn't understand him. He didn't get him. And I was
no.
just thinking, oh. And then I see Vincent's photo, and there's Theo's photo. And I'm thinking, oh, Theo, you're so amazing. But then I saw that Theo had died really right after Vincent. And I'm staring at at his photo thinking, well, this doesn't make sense. Because right next to him is this little black and white photo of a woman. This is Joe. And there's a little notation there about how she's the one who inherited all of his paintings and promoted his work. And it was written in such a way, Lisa, that I remember thinking, without you, like none of this would be here. I mean, it's just
Right.
this moment. I remember staring at her little, actually,
But it's a little thing.
here's her photo.
Hello. Hi, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, she was just
She does look strong.
she so
She
that
looks like a badass. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
she was a badass.
It's
And then I remember I get home and like everyone does, I started Google to find out more about her.
yeah.
And there I found some interviews, and one in particular kind of ticked me off because the person who was interviewing the expert answered this question that was like, why do you think Joe would continue to promote Vincent's artwork for the rest of her life? And the answer was, well, she was obeying her husband.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
no.
So Lisa, you and I are like, what? Like she
No.
cannot have her own agency?
Can't she be her own woman? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So that really,
But in those times, that woman, the answer is probably the correct way of the time. You know what I mean? But it's annoying to us. But the expert's answer about obeying her husband is probably kind of accurate for those times, but not for Joe. You know what I mean?
yeah, I can appreciate, yeah, the context for sure. But it did just strike me
But I
exactly,
don't appreciate it.
yeah, exactly the same way you and I reacted, which was like,
No.
she is a whole person with
Yeah.
her entire life. She has
But
her
actually
own.
for Europe, well, Europe was, a little bit more, a little better about women. Well, earlier than us, obviously, but
They they
they were,
each of these different historical periods of time have their sets of beliefs about each
yeah.
other, I would say. And I
Mm,
think, but my main point was that I felt like her story needed to be told
mm,
from her point of view. And so that's what ultimately set me on my journey.
wow, wow, and I mean that's a lot of research to do, and then write it as fiction, right? And so you've got a writing background, right? So we should tell people that too. This isn't like, hey, I went to a museum and then decided to write a novel. Yes, you did, but you've done some writing before. This is your debut novel, but and you're already winning awards, so you've got to be feeling pretty cool. And you're keeping her story alive, which I think is epic and so cool. And maybe one day someone will make a movie. I'm just saying,
You,
you
you,
know.
yeah, let's just tell the universe that would be a great
Yes,
idea.
hello. Get
Yeah.
on it.
Well, yeah, I think the my goal was, I mean, my greatest fear was to dishonor Joe in some way. And so my goal is to honor her, and especially against the enormous worldwide, recognition that Vincent van Gogh has, for her not to be acknowledged as being the one to really
Mm.
establish the foundation for that is wrong. It's just wrong.
There's a lot of women involved in those time frames that
Mm.
did things. I mean, they're starting to look at Shakespeare and did he write everything or was a woman writing it? I think there was a friend of I just recently a friend was telling me something about that and I said, "Well, there's this book out now. It's coming out. I'm talking to the author in a couple days." And we were trying to she was like, "No, they're saying that Shakespeare might not have written everything and a woman did." And there's all these, accounts like Fremont. I know this is totally different, but the explorer Fremont, who went out with Kit Carson, did all these big explorations and wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for Kit Carson. And some people like him and some people hate him. And he married in what we all think was for money because his wife's dad is very prominent and I think helped him get his career. And um, but it said he did all these incredible adventures, right, with Kit Carson, but she did all the writing that got him
Mm.
famous. His
Mhm.
they're all like, and it's everything. I've watched documentaries on it, and all the historians are still arguing on it. And I'm
Mhm.
gonna say she did it.
Mm.
I'm just gonna say it because you know what I mean? I know from being on the road full time, myself, that there's no way you're not doing it. You can't do all that and not have someone help you, and it's going to be your wife. It's going to be from your letters to her that she can do the proper records and accounts of what went over, and it's all part of manifest destiny and all of that. It's like he was a Lewis and Clark, and basically she wrote the reports, I
Yes,
think.
and it's almost as though, why is it a lesser story to not be celebrating the collaboration that they had? We have this
Yeah.
myth about it has to be the individual who get, on their own that is the true hero, but in fact, we know that reality is that we're all in a community and we all support and help each other in all sorts of different ways. Lisa, you and I speaking is an example of that.
Yeah, carrying a torch.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that these stories in which unsung heroes from the past are put forward, especially women's and marginalized people's stories,
Mhm.
is so important because it gives everyone a sense of agency that genius and talent is a part of being human. It's not a part of being a gender or a particular race. And why wouldn't we want uh, a a society where everyone's creativity and brilliance is just we're helping each other thrive? I mean, that's just such a more exciting,
Well,
compelling.
some people have the big foot and they lead by that, by squishing, and some go, here's a garden, go plant something, and let's
Wow.
help each other, right? So we have those two leadership manage, let's
Mm.
manage and micro control and cut and kill, and then we have the growth. Ooh, anyway, I'll behave myself.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll. Well, you've got a garden behind you, so no
I
wonder.
know. It's like I've got those beautiful iris, that were painted in May. I'm getting ready for spring. But talking about that, it's so important right now. These stories are inspiring. And, I think this story of what you've written and it being fiction, it's a way of it's hard to sell history
Mm.
because in school for many of us it was boring as hell. Here,
Mhm.
this. You're not going to hear about Joe in a history book. But
Mm-mm.
maybe by the time your book becomes a bestseller and then it becomes a movie, then historians in school will go, oh, we may want to teach this in art history now. Maybe you'll hear it in college. But the fact in his own Vincent van Gogh museum, she's a little square and she's not on the buildings where Theo is, tells you that there's a lot of work to be done. And so we don't get all that when we're in history. And it's always here's the timeline, here's the date, and boring. But for young girls, who do we have? A lot of times it goes through storytelling is powerful. It is whether it's through music, through poetry, through books, through movies, stage plays, art. Storytelling is one of the most powerful things on the planet. It
Mhm.
really is. So
Mhm.
I think you're onto something with that, and it will inspire young girls that if they see something that they can do, and it may be that, hey, you're the first one to do it. Don't not do it
Right. Exactly.
and keep going. Don't you keep banging your head against the wall. At some point, it's going to break.
And there are
Not
so
not your
many
head, hopefully.
there are so many stories of women's accomplishments and progress that are starting to come to light. It's
Mm,
but we have many, many more to go. And I do want to give the Van Gogh Museum credit, though. They have since published a biography on Joe, and I haven't been back
that's
to
awesome.
the Van Gogh Museum since pre-pandemic. But my understand when people have gone there, they've come back and told me, no, there's information on Joe that's more visible. So that is
That's
wonderful.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. No, no, it takes time. And I think women have been like kind of we have Women's History Month. And I know people don't, like all these months. I say, oh, it should be every day that we know about women in history, but it does make people think and it keeps a reminder, it keeps some kind of consistency to go back. Oh, yeah, who is this woman? Who is that woman? to do that. But man, this is I'm so excited. I know this is going to be a bestseller. Do you feel it? It's going to be. You know it is, right? It is.
What I feel right now, Lisa, is I'm in the pre-launch frenzy. So it's a little hard for me to see the forest for the trees, but my goal is, yes, let's make it a bestseller so that more and more and more and more and more people are reading about her.
Are
That
you
would
going to
be
go do like book clubs or public speaking? Are you going to do a tour? Like what's going on? Because I know it's April 15th, and thank you for not releasing it on April Fool's Day. I promise your podcast is not. We're going to have to air this on March 30th now. Yeah, we're going to have to do it on Vincent's birthday.
Vincent's birthday. Sure,
Yeah, and
sure.
we're only recording it a day or two. What Friday? We'll do it on Sunday. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, the 30th for Vincent's birthday because she made him, a universal artist,
Yes. Without him, without
universal
her.
soldier of art.
Yeah.
I've got Starry, Starry Night, that song stuck in my head now from Don McLean,
How
you
can you
know.
not? How can you not?
But yeah, I mean, what are you going to do on that side of things for people to connect? Are you going to be able to do that? Like do even Zoom calls or with book clubs? What do you think?
I am totally, my doors are open for doing book clubs. I'm doing some,
Oprah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm
Dolly
waiting for,
Parton,
I'm waiting for her call.
Dolly Parton, come on,
Oh,
too.
she's a heroine of mine right there. Oh my gosh.
Isn't she one of the most amazing humans on the planet?
She
Yeah.
has done so much and
Mm.
I think she's underrated. I think we're starting to appreciate how much she's done and how amazingly talented she is.
Consistent.
Oh,
She's
she's,
consistently good. And it's like what she does for literacy in the South,
yeah.
and it's
And
huge and it's needed, you know?
yes, it's needed. Yeah, she just steps up and she doesn't
Hmm.
create fanfare around it. She just steps up and gets things done. And
That's a good point. That's a really good point. She just does it.
yeah, she's a wonderful role. That's a high role model, but that's a
Yeah, I'm just saying. I
wouldn't
think
that
you
be
got to be on
amazing?
Oprah. You got to have your book with Dolly Parton to libraries. We got to get it in libraries everywhere so girls can get it. And we got to keep our libraries open. They're in trouble big time
Yes,
right now.
yes,
I'm seeing
yes.
things where, women's statues are now being removed
It's just
as of
such a,
today
doesn't it
as
feel
we record this.
silly? It just feels silly.
That's a really polite word of, you're polite. You're polite.
Oh my goodness.
But this is where the power of the pen,
Mm-hmm.
use it while we can. I mean, the abolitionists used the power of the pen, didn't they? And look
Mm-hmm.
how many women
Mm-hmm.
were abolitionists,
Yes, yes.
who made changes.
I love there was a Declaration of Women's Rights that was written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and
Yes, we just talked about her 2 days ago
oh,
on a
did you?
show.
Well,
Yes,
my
her and
favorite,
Susan B. Anthony. Yes.
yeah. Well, my favorite image of them is that they came to the kitchen table and they said, "All right, we're going to write this down here. Let's get the Declaration of Rights. We're going to make it so similar." It was very strategic. How can they say no? They can't say no to this because then they're saying no to the Declaration. I mean, they were just really so smart. And of course, their I know at least their initial meetings, they drew so many women. They had really
Mm,
struck a chord with what women were feeling. So,
yeah.
having just done a program, you know more than me. Those are just the initial things that just struck me about their story.
Well, and that they were doing multiple things. It wasn't, there was temperance, which of course I'm against, but I get why they did it because their husbands were, abusive and drunk. And they're like, hey, we need some law and order here. But it was a women's right to vote, but it was also minorities' rights. It was, they were doing not just one thing. They were like, we're going in for all of it. It's all or nothing. You know what I mean? But Stanton, she was amazing. Her and Susan B. Anthony. And then I don't know if you've been to like Seneca Falls area where you can see the Women's Rights National Park site is,
I was there.
oh,
Yes.
I didn't
Yes.
get to go in because it was during COVID when we were there, but they have a beautiful like peace garden and all their photos. And Harriet Tubman was out in that area too. You got to think, I mean, just that power, and it is around the kitchen table, the kitchen sink. There's something about kitchens of sitting
Mhm.
down with a pot or tea and maybe wine, but not back then. I don't think, where
Yeah, probably not.
temperance.
Yeah, probably not with their temperance. But Joe did a temperance booth in her town. I think there was
Really?
this sense that too much, that there was a scourge on society if it's out of control. Yeah, so she was doing that too. I love what
Huh.
you, I love what you just said about in the kitchen, the kitchen table, because it just is like real. It's about this is affecting families. What is
Mm.
this for? Joe's in her home doing this while her toddler plays on the floor next to her. She's just like, it's about a legacy for this little boy.
She plotted it out. But it sounds like she was very strategic in what she was doing, and then would come back to her plan and
Well,
then
I
go, "Oh,
do
this part
know,
didn't work, and let me keep going. And this is how I'm going to modify." Like she was learning through the
yes.
negatives.
She was learning through the negatives, and she also had very much of a sense of this is a long game. And the reason that I say that is because she would not lower prices, for instance. She would get
Mm.
pressure from other art dealers. In order to make a sale, you have to lower the price, and she wouldn't do it. So if you think about someone who has the long
Wow,
game in
that's
mind,
integrity.
yeah, or she also was really very careful about not flooding the market with art. I mean, Vincent painted
Mm.
900 paintings. So
Yeah,
she could have just like done a major dump, but she was very careful about maintaining a little bit of tension so that there was always demand.
wow.
So for some, and then regarding pricing, she kept increasing it over time, over time, over time, including the commission that she charged for herself. And so all of those were foundational that she worked on over time. So it was not about the quick win. It was very much how can we do this?
It's a cross country, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, do this well. And
journey.
in many ways, Lisa, I like to equate Joe's kind of intuitive sense of marketing with Lucille Ball. So
Mm.
Lucille Ball
Oh,
had
yeah,
this
yeah.
she had this
Jeez,
intuitive sense of comedy that other people said, no, that doesn't work. You're wrong. But it was so clear to her that she founded, her own production company and so forth. Her sitcom, I Love Lucy, is still the most successful sitcom ever. But it's because I think of Joe as someone who she got pushback on her marketing ideas, but for her it was like so simple. Well, no, I'm going to do this. Much like Lucille Ball met with her own studio executives that were like, you don't do comedy that way. And so she had to do her own thing. Well, Joe was told, you don't do things like that. So for example, she would create a sales catalog and she would list paintings that were not for sale along with paintings that were.
oh
And
yeah,
so the dealers would say, you don't do that. This is about sales. But what she was doing was creating that sort of scarcity mindset. Oh,
yeah.
shoot, I can't get any of these.
It's
And
sold.
yeah, or
But artists have been doing that for years now.
right. Well, it isn't even that they were sold, it's that she was setting them aside for her son too.
Mm.
But this sort
Yeah,
of sense of let me create this sense of demand. And
and an urgency.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So
That's so smart. So she learned that probably from Theo
she
and
could have,
honed it,
or she
or
knew
she
it
just did
herself.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
she
is
just got
amazing. I mean, you got to think about your background, your career background, and what she did, and really had to like think about that. Because even when you think investments and stuff like that, you have to have the patience to write it out, you know?
Yes, well, and Lisa, my background is marketing. So
Yeah,
I worked for a financial services firm, but it was all about what does the client want? What does the client need?
you
How
have
do
to
we
sell it. So it's a
Yeah.
storytelling
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, there it is again. Yeah, it's all about stories. Yeah.
Well, that's what sales is. I mean, marketing and sales go hand in hand, right? It's just a different way of getting there, but either way, it's still a story.
Hmm.
There's that, was it 10% of us is the nuts and bolts. We want the little bits and pieces. We don't want the storytelling, just get down to the basics. And then if you try to not give them just the basics, they'll walk on you. You've
Yes.
lost, you
Yes.
know?
But that's just 10%. Other people,
Exactly.
yeah, other people want the context. They want or in the case of Vincent van Gogh, people started to learn about Vincent the man who was behind.
A character.
Yeah, and even this stereotype of this someone who killed himself, but then when they started to read his words from the excerpts of letters that Joe published, it created greater empathy for him. And
Wow.
he's kind of a universal underdog, right?
Hmm.
We all,
And then it makes you think about mental health as well.
yeah,
Wow. It's a
so
big
much,
story. It's
so
a big story.
much.
It's a love story too.
Yes,
It's a
yes.
family story. It's a story of integrity. And that's the thing with art. We do an art show, and I got to send this to our friend Victoria Chick. She's an artist and she does the World of Art show. And right now we're doing the series on the history of art museums around the world, the history of art museums in this country. And she's been on shows since we, like 18 years since we started, and we've covered just about everything.
Mm.
And locally and then regionally and nationally, internationally, you name it, you know. And we always get down to the point of integrity to the art. And so I feel like if she had lessened the price of the paintings, she would have lost all integrity and all value for that big picture.
Yes,
It's crucial to have that integrity because
it's
an
crucial.
artist doesn't really, they want to be able to survive, yes, but the true artist, not the, you know, let's
Well,
sign
there,
this deal so I look good, you know what I mean, and have a fancy car. The artist who really is creating because it's part of who they are, that it's a part of their being, they have an integrity to it. And if someone doesn't buy it, they really don't care. And that's with music, books, all of it. It's this, I have to do this,
they
you
care,
know?
but they don't care. Or
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
expressed it to me once. Once, look, if you don't have to do this, don't do it. In other words, it's a hard
It's
way.
integrity. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
because it's just that challenging today. But um,
And you're wearing your heart on your sleeve no matter
yes,
what.
yes.
And if people don't like it, some are tough enough and don't care. And then some are just crippled by it, you know, because you're doing something. And I wonder about that with Vincent about, you know, the sensitivities, artists and writers, musicians, poets. There's a sensitivity to be able to find these, you know, things they're going to create from or showcase or tell a story about. There's a sensitivity to be able to observe it and then try, like, increase what they're seeing or observing or feeling to be able to be told to us who don't have those levels of sensitivities so that we feel some sensitivity. Did that make any sense?
Well, or we just need some help maybe opening our eyes so that we can see.
Yeah,
So
it's just a different way. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
different way of looking at things.
here's an example. So if you look at a bunch of Van Gogh paintings, you'll notice sometimes it looks like he's got crazy wallpaper behind his portraits, like green with
Yeah.
pink, or what he was striving to do, according to his letters, was to express this energy that he felt from someone, if they were joyful, if they were buoyant, if they were kind of mysterious, if they were deep, if they were, and so he did it not through, he did it through um
Ooh,
pattern, through color, through combinations like that, so
I
that,
wonder if he saw people's auras.
well, oh, wouldn't that be something? Wow, I
That
never thought of
sounded
that.
trippy when, as you're saying that, I was like, he's seeing their auras.
I've
I
never thought
mean,
of
he could
that.
have had a different, it may not be mental illness. It may be that he was able to see more than what we all can see.
Well,
I'm
and
just
then
saying.
that was his, I think that's what drove him to paint and paint and paint and paint and paint.
Hmm.
He was trying to express what he could
Hmm.
feel and see, but through paint,
Yeah,
oil paint, watercolor, whatever, in
all
canvas.
of it.
So
Wow.
it was this whole translation that he was striving to do.
That's amazing. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for writing your book. Everyone, you've got to go get it. It's called Saving Vincent, out April 15th, but pre-orders are awesome for authors. So go do it. Check it out. I don't want to tell people what to do, but right now I'm going to tell you what to do.
well,
Go to joanfernandezauthor.com and Amazon, all those places, right? For
that would be
everyone.
wonderful. And let me just say thank you to you, Lisa. Thank you to
Thank
all the
you.
listeners. It's so much fun to talk about this and share Joe's story.
You got, yeah, I'm going to be talking about this for the rest of the day. So
Okay.
I'm excited. Thank you so much.
You're
Everyone, take
welcome.
care. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.